The wagon came to a stop at the edge of the yard just as the noon bell down at the schoolhouse finished its last stroke, and Marta Halvorsen was on her knees in the vegetable patch with dirt up to her elbows and a broken trowel in her hand, muttering something her late mother would have washed her mouth for. She didn't look up right away. Wagons passed the farm often enough. The north road came within a stone's throw of her fence, but this one had stopped, and stopped meant someone was coming through the gate. And someone coming through the gate on a Tuesday in the middle of harvest could only be trouble or charity, and she had no use for either. "Ma'am." The voice was low and unhurried. She sat back on her heels and shaded her eyes. A man stood just inside the gate with his hat in both hands. Thin at the shoulders, but not weak-looking, dust ground into the creases of his coat like it had been there since spring. Behind him, still up on the wagon seat and holding the reins with both small fists like she'd been told never to let go, was a girl of maybe 6. Her hair was the color of new straw and pulled back tight in a way a man had done, uneven and pinched. She was staring at Marta with the flat, careful expression of a child who had learned young not to hope out loud. "I only came for work," the man said. "Heard down in Lindstrom there's a widow up this way who might need a hand through the season. I'll take feed and a bed in the barn. Won't ask for coin till the harvest is in, and if I don't earn it, I won't take it." Marta stood up slowly and wiped her hands on her apron. She was 41 years old, tall for a woman, and the last 3 winters had put something into her face that discouraged strangers from lingering. She used that face now. And the child? The man's eyes went sideways for the barest second before he brought them back. "She travels with me." Marta looked past him at the girl on the wagon. The girl had not moved. The reins were still gripped in those small fists. "Come down from there, sweetheart," Marta said. The girl looked at her father. He gave the smallest nod. She climbed down carefully, one foot then the other, her boots too big for her by half, and walked to stand at his hip. She did not take his hand. She stood beside him the way a soldier stands beside another soldier. Then she looked up at Marta with those steady eyes and asked, in a voice clear as well water, "Can she stay here?" Marta blinked. "Can who stay here, honey?" The girl pointed. Not at herself. At a small carved wooden horse tucked into the crook of her arm, worn smooth at the ears from years of a thumb rubbing there. "Her name is Pip," the girl said. "She's tired of the wagon. She wants a place with a window." Behind the child, the man closed his eyes for one breath, and Marta saw in that breath the entire shape of a man trying not to cry in front of his daughter for what was probably not the first time that week. She looked at the girl. She looked at the horse. She looked at the man's hollow cheeks and the dust in his beard and the way the wagon behind him held everything they owned, which was almost nothing. "Pip can stay," Marta said. "And so can the 2 of you, till we sort this out." She meant till supper. She meant till she'd fed them and figured out what to do with them. She did not mean what came after. His name was Thomas Rennick. The girl's name was Ivy. He was 34, and he had walked out of a mining camp in the Black Hills 11 weeks ago with his daughter and a wagon he'd bought for $6 and a promise, and he had been moving south and east ever since, taking work where he could find it, sleeping under the wagon when he couldn't. He told her none of this at first. She got it in pieces, over 3 days, the way you pull a splinter, a little at a time, and only when the person lets you. The first day, he unloaded the wagon into the corner of the barn she cleared for him, working with the kind of quiet efficiency that told her he'd done hard labor his whole life and knew how to save his back. Ivy sat on a hay bale with Pip on her knee and watched him. She did not speak unless spoken to. When Marta brought out bread and cold ham at noon, the girl waited until her father had eaten half of his before she took a bite of her own. That detail sat under Marta's ribs the rest of the day. That evening, after Thomas had washed at the pump and Ivy had been put down on a pallet, Marta made up in the small back room off the kitchen. Over his protest that the barn was enough, that they weren't beggars, Marta sat across from him at her kitchen table with the lamp between them and said, "Where's her mother, Mr. Rennick?" He didn't answer for a long moment. He turned his coffee cup in a slow half circle. Then he said, "In the ground. Outside Deadwood. 2 years and 4 months. I'm sorry. So am I." The clock on the mantel ticked. Outside, one of her hens complained about something in the dark. "You've been on the road a long time," she said. "Yes. That's no life for a child." His jaw worked. "I know it." She let the silence sit. She'd learned, from her husband's long dying, that some things a person will only say into a silence. There was a foreman in the camp, he said finally, not looking at her. After my wife passed, he took an interest in Ivy. Not the kind of interest a man ought to take in a little girl. I broke his hand with a shovel, and we left that night. That's why we've been moving. He put word out. He looked up at her then, and his eyes were the color of dishwater and completely without self-pity. I'll be square with you, ma'am. If a man comes asking, I'd be obliged if you said we passed through and moved on. I won't put you in the middle of it any further than that. Come first frost, we'll be gone. You have my word. Marta looked at him a long time. She was a widow who had buried a husband and a stillborn son and both her parents inside of 7 years, and she knew what a person looked like when they were telling the truth about a thing that had cost them everything. Finish your coffee, Mr. Rennick, she said. We start on the north fence in the morning. Now, if you've been listening this far, do me a small favor and picture the shape of that first evening. A widow's kitchen, a stranger at her table, a little girl asleep in the next room with a wooden horse tucked under her chin, and somewhere behind them, a man on a road, coming. That's the story. Sit with it a moment. Wherever you're listening from tonight, I hope your kitchen's warm. The first 2 weeks, Marta watched them the way you watch a stray dog you fed once, waiting to see what kind of animal you'd taken in. What she saw slowly took the edge off her watching. Thomas worked like a man who owed the ground something. He mended the north fence in 3 days, a job her husband had put off for the last spring of his life. He reshod the plow horse. He climbed onto the barn roof and replaced the shakes that had been leaking into the loft since a hailstorm the previous May. And when Marta went out to bring him water, she stood a long minute at the foot of the ladder watching him move up there, sure-footed, unhurried, humming something under his breath that might have been a hymn, and she thought, without wanting to, that it had been a long time since a man's humming had come from her own roof. Ivy took longer to thaw. For a full week, she trailed her father everywhere, keeping Pip clutched against her chest, watching Marta the way a sparrow watches a cat. Then one afternoon Marta was in the kitchen shelling peas, and Ivy appeared at the doorway with Pip in one hand, and stood there. You can come in, honey, Marta said, without looking up. The girl came in. She stood by the table. After a long silence, she said, Pip likes peas. Does she? She's never had them, but she thinks she likes them. Marta slid the bowl across. Then Pip had better help me shell, or she doesn't get any. Ivy climbed onto the chair across from her, arranged Pip on the table facing the bowl, and began to shell peas with the concentrated seriousness of a bank clerk counting money. She did not speak again for an hour. But when Thomas came in for supper that night, the girl was still at Marta's elbow, chopping onion badly and blinking through the sting, and Thomas stopped in the doorway and looked at the two of them, and something in his face went briefly loose, like a rope untied. Word travels in a small farming valley the way water finds a crack. By the third Sunday, the Reverend's wife had asked pointed questions after service, and by the fourth, Marta could feel eyes on her at the store in town, and by the fifth, Alma Pettigrew, her nearest neighbor and, by long tradition, her most reliable irritation, came up the road in her buggy uninvited and sat in Marta's kitchen drinking Marta's coffee with a face like a shut door. You've got a man living on your place, Marta. He's in the barn, Alma. He's at your table. He's at my table because he's eating the supper he earned. Alma set her cup down with a small precise click. There's talk. There's always talk. Talk cost you a nickel, you'd be broke. He's a stranger. He's a hand now. With a child. Marta. A little girl. Whose mother nobody's seen. In the house of a woman who lives alone. You don't see how that looks. I see how it looks to you, Alma. That's a different thing. Alma's mouth pinched. The Reverend asked after him. By name. Marta felt the small cold thing slide down inside her chest, and she kept her face steady. Did the Reverend say why? He said a man came through Lindstrom last week asking after a Thomas Rennick and a little girl. Said the man was polite. Said the man was well-dressed. Said the man said he was Thomas's brother-in-law, come to bring the child home to family after her mother's passing. Alma's eyes were on Marta's face, watching. The Reverend thought you ought to know. Marta did not move for a moment. Then she stood and refilled Alma's cup with a hand that did not shake, and said, that was kind of the Reverend. When Alma had gone, Marta stood at the kitchen window a long time watching Thomas in the far field, small at that distance, moving along the fence line with his shirt off in the September heat. Ivy was sitting cross-legged in the grass 10 feet from him, Pip in her lap, watching him work the way she watched everything he did, as though if she looked away, he might not be there when she looked back. Marta thought about a well-dressed man asking polite questions in Lindstrom. She thought about a shovel in a foreman's hand. She thought about a little girl who waited until her father had eaten half his supper. That night, she waited until Ivy was asleep, and then she went out to the barn with a lantern and found Thomas sitting on an upturned crate mending a bridle by the light of his own candle. He looked up when she came in and set the bridle aside without her having to speak. "He's found you," she said. He absorbed this without expression. Then he nodded, slowly, once. "He's calling himself her uncle," she said. "Says he's come to bring her home to family. He's been asking in Lindstrom. He's no uncle. Her mother had no brothers. Her mother had nobody but me and the child." His voice was flat, controlled. "How long?" "A week, near as I can tell. Maybe less." He was quiet a long moment. Then he stood and set the candle on the beam and said, "Then I'll be gone by morning. Ma'am, Marta, I owe you more than I can pay. I'll leave the tools I mended. I'll—" "Sit down, Thomas." He stopped. "Sit down." He sat. She set the lantern on the crate beside him and pulled up the milking stool and sat across from him with her knees almost touching his, and she said, quietly, "If you take that child back out on the road tomorrow with a man hunting you, and something happens to her, I will never forgive you, and neither will you. So we're not doing that. Marta, we're not doing that. Listen to me now. I've been alone in this house for 6 years. I have papers. I have standing in this valley. I have a reverend who owes my father a favor from before I was born, and a sheriff who was in the same schoolroom as my brother, and a lawyer in town my late husband kept on retainer for reasons that will now finally prove useful. I have things you don't have, Thomas Rennick, and I am telling you that you and that little girl are going to use them." He looked at her, and the light from the lantern caught in his eyes, and she saw for the first time since he'd walked through her gate a look of something other than exhausted endurance, a look of a man who had, against his own better judgment, begun to hope. "Why?" he said. She thought about it honestly before she answered. "Because she asked if her horse could stay," Marta said. "And a child who asks that has been told no about a lot of bigger things. And I am done being the kind of person who says no to that child." The man calling himself Cyrus Belden arrived on a Thursday, in a hired buggy, wearing a coat too fine for the road. He came alone. That was his first mistake. He came polite. That was his second. He came thinking a widow woman on a scratched-together farm in a valley of Scandinavian corn growers would be easy to talk around. And that was the mistake that finished him. Marta received him on the porch with her hands folded and did not invite him inside. She had, that morning, ridden into town at first light and spoken to 3 people. The Reverend, who confirmed the description and the questions. The sheriff, Ollie Bergstrom, who had indeed sat 2 rows behind her brother in the one-room school on the county line, who listened to her account with a face growing steadily more still. And the lawyer, Mr. Whitmore, who had known her husband and who had, at her request, drawn up a document that now sat folded in the pocket of her apron. She let Belden speak first. She let him call himself the child's uncle. She let him express his gentle concern about the little girl's welfare and his family's grief and their earnest desire to bring her home to Kansas, where she belonged. She let him name a sum, not too large, respectful, that he was prepared to offer for Marta's trouble and Thomas's back wages, so that the matter could be settled today, quietly, with no need to trouble the law or the neighbors. She listened to all of it. She had a face for listening. She had used it on cattle buyers and land agents and a doctor who had told her once that her son was not going to draw breath, and she used it now. When he had finished, she said, "Mr. Belden." "Yes, ma'am." The child's mother had no siblings. She had no living family at all, in Kansas or anywhere else. Her husband is her family. Her daughter is her family. There is no one else. I've been given to understand you know this. His face did something small. "I've also been given to understand," she continued, in the same even voice, "that in the mining camp where the child's mother is buried, you held a foreman's position, and that your interest in her daughter was of a kind that caused her father to break your hand with a shovel and leave the territory that same night. Which would explain, Mr. Belden, why you are wearing that glove in September." His eyes went to her face and stayed there. "The sheriff of this county is a personal friend," she said. "He is at present sitting in my kitchen with a cup of my coffee, along with the Reverend, who is a personal friend, and my attorney, who is a personal friend. In my pocket is a document granting Thomas Rennick and his daughter Ivy Rennick residence and legal protection on this property, witnessed and filed this morning. If you would like to make a claim on the child, you are welcome to do so through the courts of this state, in daylight, in front of a judge, with your name and your history and your hand entered into the record. She paused. Or you can get back in that buggy, Mr. Belden, and you can go, and you can never come within the boundary of this county again. Those are the options I'm prepared to offer you. Choose. He looked at her a long, long moment. He was a man used to reading rooms, and he was reading her, and she watched him understand, slowly, with visible reluctance, that there was no room here to read. There was only a woman on a porch and 3 men behind a door and a document in an apron pocket in a country that, on this particular Thursday, was not going to bend for him. He touched his hat. He said, "Ma'am." He got back in the buggy. He was gone before the shadow of the porch post had moved a hand's width across the boards. Ivy came out of the house then, from where she had been standing behind the kitchen door with Pip pressed against her chest, and Thomas came out behind her, and the 3 of them stood on the porch and watched the dust of the buggy shrink down the north road. Ivy slipped her hand into Marta's. It was the first time the child had touched her. "Is he gone?" Ivy said. "He's gone, honey. For good." Marta looked down at the small, serious face. She thought about lying. She thought about the promises adults made to children about permanence, and how often those promises broke. Then she said, "He's gone. And if he ever comes back, there are a lot of us here now. Not just me. A lot of us. Do you understand what I'm telling you?" Ivy thought about it. She nodded, once, the way her father nodded. "Pip understands too," she said. The frost came in mid-October, and Thomas did not leave. The harvest came in on time, which had not happened on Marta's farm in 3 years. The lawyer Whitmore drew up a second document in November and a third in the spring. There was talk in the valley, of course. There is always talk. Alma Pettigrew never fully came around, but she came around enough to bring a jar of preserves at Christmas and to stand godmother when, the following autumn, the Reverend married Marta and Thomas in the small white church at the county line, with Ivy holding the ring on a length of blue ribbon and Pip watching from the front pew, propped against a hymnal. Ivy grew. That was the thing Marta had not been prepared for. How fast a child grew when a child was allowed to. By 8, she was reading aloud from the newspaper at supper. By 10, she was riding out with Thomas to check the fence line, and she rode astride, and no one in the valley found the breath to say a word about it. By 12, she stood as tall as Marta's shoulder, and had her father's steady eyes and her mother's straw-colored hair and a laugh that came up out of her like water, finding its own level, easy, unafraid, and often. The wooden horse Pip sat on the windowsill of Ivy's room for the rest of her childhood, in the window facing east, so she could see the sunrise. Ivy had asked for that window on purpose, the second week they lived in the house, in the same clear voice she had used at the gate. Marta had given it to her without a moment's thought. It was, Marta came to understand later, the first thing in the child's life she had ever asked for and been given without condition. Years on, when Ivy was grown and gone to her own house down the valley with her own husband and her own small girl, she came back one afternoon in autumn and stood in her old room and looked at Pip on the sill, faded now, one ear worn down almost to nothing. Her daughter, 3 years old, straw-haired, serious, reached up for the horse. "Careful, sweetheart," Ivy said. "She's old. Can she come home with us?" Ivy looked at her mother, who stood in the doorway with her hair gone silver at the temples and her hands still strong. Marta smiled. "You'll have to ask Pip," Marta said. "She's got opinions." The child considered the horse with great seriousness. Then she looked up at both of them, at her mother and her grandmother, at the 2 women in the doorway of the room where all of it had started, and she asked, clear as well water, as though it were the most natural question in the world, "Can she stay here?" Neither woman answered right away. They didn't have to. A house is a house because of what it lets stay. Marta reached down and lifted the child up so she could see the horse better, and outside the east window the light was going gold across the fields her husband had spent the last 22 years tending, and somewhere down the lane a dog was barking at nothing, and the world, for that one held minute, was exactly the size of the 3 of them and the small wooden horse on the sill. I'll leave the 2 of them there, in that light, with that question. Some stories end with someone riding off. This one ends with someone being asked, one more time, if she can stay, and the answer already known before the asking. If a story like this one warmed your kitchen tonight, tell me where you're listening from and stay close. There are more of these coming, and I've been saving a good one.